The grand halls of the Intergalactic Academy were filled with a low hum as students from various worlds filtered into their classrooms. Alien species from every corner of the galaxy, each with their own unique biology, were settling into their seats. The air was charged with excitement as the new semester was beginning. The sun's light filtered through the massive glass windows, casting colorful shadows on the floor. In one such classroom, the students were seated, eager to begin their studies. At the front of the room stood the instructor, a wise Zorathian who had taught at the academy for centuries. His alien form, tall and regal, towered over the room, his four glowing eyes scanning the students. But today, he wasn't here to teach them the usual subjects. Today, he had something different in mind. Today, the instructor began, his voice echoing in the vast classroom, "We will discuss the humans of Earth." A murmur passed through the room. The mention of Earth brought confused looks, followed by a few chuckles. The instructor clicked a button on his console, and a large screen behind him lit up, displaying an image of Earth: blue oceans, green continents, and swirling clouds. The planet looked peaceful and small. It seemed so, primitive. Humans, the instructor continued, are not like the other species you have encountered. They are banned from several areas of this academy. The students exchanged curious glances. Banned. A species was banned from an academy for the brightest minds in the universe. It was hard for them to believe. A few students whispered, trying to hide their laughter. One, a tall and sleek Vrixian with silver scales, couldn't help but snicker. "They banned because they can't understand the advanced tech here," the Vrixian joked, his voice carrying in the room. The instructor's expression remained stern. "No," he replied, "it's not their intelligence, it's their unpredictability." The students, still unsure of the seriousness of the subject, leaned back in their chairs. They found it hard to imagine that these strange, fragile creatures from Earth could pose a threat to an academy built by the most advanced species in the galaxy. A Thou, a creature with 8 limbs and eyes that constantly shifted colors, raised one of its long arms. "Are they banned because they break things? We all know how clumsy humans can be. I heard they can't even understand gravity properly." The classroom erupted in quiet laughter. The Uthal's comments seemed to strike a chord with the other students. Humans breaking things seemed like something that could easily explain their banishment from certain parts of the academy. The instructor, unfazed by the comments, clicked another button on his console. The screen changed to show a video of a human standing on Earth, looking up at the sky. He looked like any other human, ordinary, with brown hair and a simple shirt. But the video was anything but ordinary. The human was surrounded by a massive, deadly storm, an event that could destroy any advanced species in seconds. Yet, the human stood there, eyes fixed on the storm, unmoving. The room went silent. "This is not a special human," the instructor said, his voice low and serious. "This is what they do. They stand in the face of impossible odds, staring danger in the eye, and they survive. You see, humans have an innate survival instinct, an unpredictable ability to adapt to the harshest of conditions. They don't back down, even when their chances of survival are zero." The students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't what they had expected. They had assumed that humans were a simple, weak species. But what they were hearing now was far different from their assumptions. A small, green-skinned Erexian student, known for her quick wit, spoke up, breaking the silence. "Survival instinct sounds more like stupidity to me. Why would anyone stand in front of a storm like that? Why not run and save themselves?" The instructor's voice grew even more serious as he replied, "That is exactly why humans are dangerous. They don't run. They don't flee from danger. And when faced with the impossible, they find a way to survive. Their instinct isn't just to save themselves, it's to overcome." The students exchanged uneasy glances, the laughter from earlier now a distant memory. This was serious. The instructor went on, explaining that the ban wasn't because the humans were weak, but because they had proven to be capable of breaking through barriers in ways no one else could understand. They had a way of defying the laws of nature, of surviving things that should have been impossible. The screen flickered again, and a new image appeared this time. It showed a small human village under attack by a massive alien force. The villagers, outnumbered and outgunned, should have been wiped out within minutes, but instead of surrendering, the humans fought back. They set traps, used the terrain, and fought with everything they had. The video showed one human, barely more than a child, picking up an old, rusted weapon. The weapon was clearly outdated and useless compared to the advanced alien tech. Yet, in the hands of the child, it became something else. The child fired the weapon, hitting the lead alien commander and disabling the entire force. Against all odds, the humans won. The room was now eerily quiet. The students stared at the screen in disbelief. How could something so small, so seemingly insignificant, do what they just saw? The human didn't just survive, he defeated a force far stronger than him. That, the instructor said, is why humans are banned from the restricted zones. They can't be predicted, and that unpredictability is dangerous. One student, a proud and fierce Drexian warrior, shook his head in disbelief. But they can't be that dangerous. Surely no human could stand against a force like mine. The instructor met his gaze. Perhaps, but don't underestimate them. You might just find yourself in a situation where that human unpredictability becomes the one thing that stands between you and victory. The laughter had disappeared. The students now looked at Earth and its humans with a newfound respect, or perhaps, a little fear. The instructor's warning hung in the air, thick with the weight of truth, and the mystery was only beginning. The alien students shifted uneasily in their seats as the instructor's words echoed in their minds. The human survival instinct was a strange, foreign concept to them. They had all grown up in a universe where technology, power, and intellect defined the strongest species. The idea that a primitive race from a backwater planet like Earth could pose a threat seemed almost laughable at first. Yet, as they watched the footage of humans facing death and somehow surviving against all odds, doubt began to creep into their thoughts. One of the students, a sleek Corithian with elongated limbs and translucent skin, leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "So, what you're saying is, humans are unpredictable, but that doesn't make them dangerous. We have weapons and technology that could wipe them out without breaking a sweat. Their survival instinct doesn't change that." The instructor, who had been quiet for a moment, clicked another button on his console, and the screen shifted once more. This time, it showed an image of an ancient battlefield, the kind from Earth's history books, muddy trenches filled with human soldiers. They were outnumbered and armed with crude weaponry. It was a scene from one of Earth's most brutal wars. The human soldiers fought with desperation, using every ounce of their strength and resourcefulness to stay alive, despite being clearly inferior in both numbers and technology. But the video zoomed in on a young human soldier, his face dirty and bruised, as he pushed forward through the chaos. In that moment, despite all the bloodshed, something unexplainable happened. The soldier managed to find a way to turn the tide of the battle. His ingenuity, his refusal to accept defeat, led to a victory against an enemy far stronger and better equipped. The Corithian student's skepticism began to falter. This doesn't make sense. They had nothing to work with. How could they? The instructor interrupted, his voice growing serious. This is not just a matter of strength or weapons. It's about something far deeper. Humans, unlike any species in the galaxy, have an incredible ability to adapt under extreme pressure. They thrive in chaos, in conditions that would break most others. It's why they've survived, against all odds, for so long. A murmur spread throughout the classroom. The students, once dismissive of the human species, were beginning to grasp the full scope of what they were being told. The idea of a species fighting not just for survival but against the very forces of nature and the universe itself was slowly sinking in. "Let's take a closer look," the instructor continued. "This isn't just an isolated incident. Humans have a long history of facing impossible odds and coming out on top. They've survived ice ages, plagues, famine, and even attacks from other species far more powerful than themselves." The screen shifted again, showing footage from another time in Earth's history. This time, it was a group of humans facing a massive, predatory alien creature, a beast so enormous that it could crush entire cities. The creature's claws alone were capable of tearing through the toughest of materials, and yet, the humans didn't flee. Instead, they found a way to outsmart it. They worked together, using their environment, setting traps, and creating a plan that allowed them to defeat the creature despite their obvious disadvantage. One of the students, a young Arcturian with sleek blue skin and 6 eyes, leaned forward. "But surely they don't do this all the time, do they? They can't be this lucky over and over again." The instructor's eyes narrowed, sensing the doubt in the room. "Luck doesn't explain what they've done. What you're seeing isn't luck. It's a combination of instinct, intelligence, and something even harder to define. A deep, unshakable belief that they can overcome anything." The students shifted again, now realizing that the instructor wasn't just showing them examples of human survival. He was showing them the essence of what made humans so dangerous. They weren't just survivors, they were conquerors of adversity. Their sheer will to overcome, to adapt, and to never give up in the face of death made them something different, something unpredictable. I still don't see how this is a problem for us, the Corinthian said, shaking his head. We've conquered entire star systems. If these humans are really that dangerous, we could just— The instructor raised a hand, silencing the room. You're missing the point. It's not about weapons or technology. It's about their spirit. They're not like any species you've encountered. They don't think like you. They don't run away from danger. Instead, they face it head-on. And when they do, they often win. That is why they are banned from the restricted zones. The Corinthian scoffed, still skeptical. But how could that be enough to make a difference? A few humans standing against a force greater than them doesn't mean they can stand against us. The instructor's eyes gleamed as he leaned forward, lowering his voice. What you fail to understand is this. When you face a human in a situation where survival is at stake, you're not just fighting against their strength, you're fighting against their determination, their refusal to accept defeat. That's the key, and that is something no weapon or force can predict. The students sat in stunned silence. They had heard the words, but the weight of what the instructor was saying didn't fully sink in until now. They could not grasp it at first. How could humans, primitive creatures, have this deep well of resilience that could stand against such powerful forces? It made no sense, yet the evidence was right in front of them. The instructor turned off the screen, but the atmosphere in the room remained heavy. The students couldn't shake the images of those humans standing tall in the face of monsters, storms, and forces far beyond them. There was a part of them that couldn't help but admire the humans for their courage. Another part felt something darker, something unsettling. If these creatures, so small and so fragile, could resist everything thrown at them and still win, what would happen if they truly set their sights on something bigger? We may have underestimated them, the instructor said softly, his voice barely a whisper. But now, you must understand, humans are more than just survivors. They are a force to be reckoned with, and they are not to be taken lightly. The classroom was filled with a buzz of whispered conversations as the students digested this new, unsettling truth. They had always prided themselves on their intelligence, their strength, and their superiority, but now, they were beginning to see that the humans, those simple creatures from Earth, had something that none of them could easily conquer, and that was what made them so dangerous. The classroom felt heavier now. The students were no longer the confident, slightly arrogant aliens they had been just an hour ago. Instead, there was a palpable sense of uncertainty, an unease that rippled through the room. They were all thinking the same thing, though none of them dared to voice it. How could a species so primitive, so fragile, be so dangerous? The instructor, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, allowed a long silence to settle before speaking again. His eyes, still glowing faintly, moved over the students as if to gauge their reactions. "You've seen the footage," he said slowly, his voice echoing in the stillness. "But what you've seen is only a small part of the story. The true test is not just their ability to survive, it's their ability to learn." A young student, his skin covered in soft bioluminescent scales that flickered as he moved, raised his hand. "What do you mean by that? You said they were unpredictable. How can they learn something if they don't understand it in the first place?" The instructor gave a small nod, acknowledging the question. "That is where humans are truly remarkable. When faced with a challenge, they don't retreat, they don't simply fight, they adapt, and they learn. You saw how a human soldier turned the tide of an impossible battle. But that's not the full picture. What makes humans dangerous is that they learn from their mistakes and they never stop improving." The students shifted in their seats. The idea of a species that could not only survive against odds but actively learn from every experience was something they hadn't considered. A dark-skinned alien who had been silent until now spoke up. "So you're saying they don't just survive because they get lucky, they get better over time?" "Exactly," the instructor replied, a small, approving smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Human ingenuity is their greatest weapon. It's why they've managed to overcome challenges that would have wiped out other species long ago. They find solutions where others see nothing but failure, and that's something that no technology, no amount of firepower can predict." As the instructor spoke, the room fell even quieter, the students processing the new information. The concept of a species that could learn and evolve so rapidly unsettled them in a way they hadn't anticipated. For so long they had relied on their technology and intellect to stay ahead of the curve. But the humans, those seemingly primitive creatures, had shown them a completely different kind of strength. A strength that didn't depend on weapons or technology, but on sheer will, and the ability to adapt. The instructor paced slowly across the front of the room. Now, I will show you something that will further challenge your understanding of humans, something that may even frighten you. He gestured to the large screen again, and a new video began to play. This time, it showed a group of humans trapped in a massive underground facility. The walls were collapsing around them, and the structure was crumbling. It was the kind of situation that would have destroyed entire fleets of advanced species. Yet the humans, these fragile, weak beings, panic. They didn't run. Instead, they worked together. The video showed one human, a woman, trying to figure out how to stabilize the building's energy core. The others worked on securing escape routes, while some were focused on setting up makeshift barricades to protect themselves from falling debris. There was a constant, synchronized movement between them, a silent understanding, as if they all knew exactly what needed to be done without saying a word. Then the woman found the core's stabilization mechanism, but it was damaged, and without the proper tools, fixing it would be impossible for any normal species. Yet, she didn't give up. The human woman, using only basic tools she found in the wreckage, began to improvise. She rigged a set of circuits together, rewired them, and somehow, against all odds, managed to stabilize the core enough to buy the group time to escape. The video paused, and the instructor's voice broke the silence. This is the human approach to any situation. They don't just try to survive, they solve problems. And when the solution isn't clear, they create one. It's this ability to adapt, to think on their feet, that makes them dangerous. A quiet hum ran through the room, as the students exchanged glances. The sheer determination they had seen in that video was something none of them had expected. This human, armed with nothing but her resourcefulness, had saved a group of her people by doing what others would have thought impossible. And the most unsettling part, she did it without hesitation. The Erexian student from earlier, who had been skeptical from the beginning, spoke up. But what about their technology? You said they don't rely on it, yet they've developed their own weapons, their own systems. Couldn't that be just as dangerous? The instructor's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Yes, they've created their own technology, but unlike other species, they don't place all their faith in it. Human technology is built out of necessity, out of survival. They use what they have, and they make the most of it. They don't rely on it blindly. That's why they're able to adapt so quickly. It's the combination of their mind and willpower that gives them an edge. The students leaned forward, captivated. The more they learned about humans, the more they realized how little they truly knew. They had always thought of them as weak, primitive beings, but now, with each new piece of information, their perception of Earth's inhabitants was shifting. Imagine facing an enemy, the instructor continued, his voice soft but carrying weight, that doesn't just learn from each battle, it gets stronger. And it learns not only from victory but from defeat as well. A species that refuses to quit. That is what makes humans so dangerous. The room was filled with an uneasy silence. The once confident alien students, so sure of their superiority just hours ago, were now filled with doubt. The instructor's words had shattered their perception of what was possible, of what could truly make a species dangerous. The humans, those simple creatures from Earth, weren't dangerous because of their strength or technology. They were dangerous because of something much harder to define, their incredible, unyielding resilience. As the lesson came to an end, the students remained in their seats, lost in thought. The video of the human woman, standing alone against the chaos, replayed in their minds. The power of her determination, her ability to adapt to an impossible situation, made it clear humans weren't just survivors. They were a force that couldn't be ignored. And in the back of their minds, each student wondered, what if one of them had to face a human? What would happen then? The weight of the previous lesson hung in the air like a thick fog. The students sat in stunned silence, their thoughts racing, trying to process the idea that had just been planted in their minds. Humans were not what they had believed them to be. They weren't just a weak, primitive species, clinging to life in the dark corners of the universe. They were something else entirely, something far more dangerous. As the instructor turned off the screen, the class slowly shifted in their seats, some looking at their classmates, others lost in their thoughts. The room, once filled with casual chatter and confident arrogance, was now eerily quiet. The students, each from vastly different planets, species, and backgrounds, found themselves united by one unsettling truth. They had underestimated the humans. A deep sense of curiosity began to replace the initial skepticism. The students were no longer simply watching from the sidelines. They were now participants in a mystery they hadn't anticipated. What would it take to break a human? Could they even be broken? The question lingered in the air, But there was no easy answer. The instructor seemed to sense their growing discomfort. He stood at the front, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning the room as if measuring the weight of their thoughts. "You are beginning to understand," he said, slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, "but there is more you need to see. More that will show you exactly how far humans are willing to go to prove themselves, and why they are not to be underestimated." The words struck like a sudden storm. The students leaned forward instinctively, all of them hungry for answers. The instructor's tone had shifted, becoming more intense, almost foreboding. "What I'm about to show you," he continued, "is the kind of footage that most would consider too dangerous to reveal. But I believe you need to see it because this is the truth about humans, the one you refuse to acknowledge." He clicked a button on his console and the screen flickered to life again. But this time, the image wasn't one of a simple battle or survival. It was something darker, something far more unsettling. The footage began with a narrow view, the camera shaking violently as it zoomed through a dark, cramped hallway. The sounds of heavy breathing filled the air, a clear sign that whoever was holding the camera was in a state of intense panic. The scene was chaotic, lights flickering on and off, shadows twisting unnaturally in the corners of the frame. It was clear something was wrong. Then, the image focused on a human, dirty, exhausted, and covered in wounds. This was no soldier, no hero in shining armor. This was a civilian, someone who shouldn't have been in this situation at all. He was running for his life, stumbling, falling, and picking himself up again, his breath ragged in his chest. He was in a place that looked like a war zone, but this wasn't a battle between armies. This was something else entirely. The students watched in tense silence as the human turned a corner, and came face to face with what could only be described as an alien nightmare, a towering, grotesque creature, its massive form blocking the path. The creature had multiple eyes, each one burning with malice. Its claws were longer than the human's body, and its mouth opened in a twisted, jagged grin, revealing rows of teeth sharp enough to rip through steel. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The human, trapped, had nowhere to run. It was certain death, a fate no one could possibly survive. But the human didn't scream. He didn't give up. Instead, his eyes narrowed, and a strange, focused calm seemed to settle over him. The students could see it on his face, not fear, but a resolve they couldn't quite understand. Then, with no weapon and no armor, the human did the unthinkable. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small makeshift device, and with trembling hands, activated it. The device hummed to life, sending a pulse of energy toward the creature. The creature recoiled, its eyes flashing in confusion, but it was momentarily stunned. The human didn't waste the opportunity. He darted toward the creature, not running away, but attacking. With a speed that seemed impossible, he managed to dodge its claws, slip between its massive legs, and reach a vulnerable spot on its underbelly. The students watched in horror as the human used his bare hands to strike, targeting weak points with a precision no one could have predicted. The creature roared, a sound that rattled the walls, but the human's determination didn't falter. He kept moving, kept fighting, until after what seemed like an eternity, he finally found the creature's heart, a pulsing, fragile organ nestled beneath its thick, armored hide. Without hesitation, the human drove his fist into it, the creature's body spasming violently before it collapsed. The footage ended abruptly, the screen going black. The classroom was silent, save for the faint hum of the console. No one moved. No one spoke. The students were still processing what they had just witnessed. The instructor's voice cut through the silence. This human, this ordinary civilian, faced an enemy far more powerful than he was. He had no advanced weaponry, no superior strength. Yet he didn't hesitate, he didn't give up, and against all odds, he won. What you saw was not luck, it was the result of his will, his drive to survive. He didn't just fight, he overcame. The students were frozen in place, their minds racing. The image of the human, bloodied and battered, still lingered in their minds. What kind of creature was this? How could someone so fragile, so small in comparison to them, stand against something so monstrous and emerge victorious? For the first time they began to see the truth. The instructor had said it before, humans were unpredictable, but now they realized it was more than that. Humans didn't just survive because they were lucky. They survived because they had something the other species didn't, an unyielding drive, an ability to adapt, and a refusal to accept defeat. One student, a towering Gorksian with scales like iron plating, leaned forward, his voice low and filled with awe. "What would it take to break them?" he asked. The instructor's eyes met his, and for the first time, A flicker of something like uncertainty passed over his face. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "And that is why humans are so dangerous. They are not easily defeated." The room was thick with the weight of that realization. The students, once so sure of their superiority, were now left questioning everything they thought they knew about the universe. The human race had revealed itself to be something far more complex, more powerful, than they had ever imagined, and deep inside, each of them wondered, what if one day they would face that kind of determination? What if they were forced to fight, not against superior technology, but against sheer willpower and survival instinct? The thought was chilling. The air in the classroom was thick with tension as the instructor's words hung in the silence. The students were no longer laughing, no longer scoffing at the idea that humans were a threat. They were thinking, processing something deep inside. Their minds had shifted. What they had seen, the relentless determination of the human, was not something they could easily dismiss. The instructor had shown them a new side of humans, one that was far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. As the instructor stood before them, his eyes scanning their faces, it was clear that he knew what they were thinking. He'd thrown them into uncertainty, and now he was going to push them even further. "You've seen enough of their strength, but there's more to it," the instructor said, his voice carrying the weight of something even darker, something the students weren't prepared to hear. He clicked the button again, and this time the screen showed something completely different. New set of images that had nothing to do with battle or survival. These images weren't about humans fighting for their lives. Instead, they showed something that seemed entirely foreign to the students: humanity's ability to influence, to change the environment around them, to shape the course of events. The first image was of a human standing in front of a group of alien leaders. The human was small in comparison, his body rigid, his eyes locked on the faces of those seated before him. The room was filled with beings from all across the galaxy: warriors, diplomats, conquerors, and yet, despite the towering presence of those around him, the human was not intimidated. He was standing at the head of the table, speaking with authority, his words cutting through the noise of a heated discussion. The alien leaders, proud and powerful, listened as the human continued. The students could see the surprise on their faces, the uncertainty in their eyes. It wasn't just that the human was speaking, it was how they were reacting. This small, fragile creature, someone they had once dismissed as insignificant, changing the flow of an entire conversation. "Humans," the instructor said softly, "are not just survivors. They are incredibly persuasive. They understand the one thing that many of you have forgotten: the power of influence." The footage continued. The human was now leading a negotiation between several powerful species, each one more advanced and complex than the next. The students watched in awe as the human deftly navigated the conversation, shifting the focus of the discussions, aligning the interests of factions that had been in conflict for centuries. He wasn't using force, he wasn't relying on technology or weapons, he wasn't even using advanced tactics. Instead, the human used something far more subtle: the power of words, the ability to make others see things from a different perspective. He was able to unite beings who had been at war for millennia, convincing them to work together for a common goal. The video showed the moment when the human's final words turned the tide. "We all share this universe, don't we? And if we don't act now, we risk losing everything: our existence, our purpose. This is our last chance to come together." All of us, the alien leaders, once cold and indifferent, were now nodding in agreement. The students could hardly believe their eyes. The human wasn't just speaking to them, he was changing them. "Influence is a powerful weapon," the instructor continued, his voice low and almost reverent, "and humans understand its full potential. They know how to manipulate a situation to their advantage. They don't need technology or strength to conquer. Sometimes their words alone are enough to reshape the course of history." The students sat in stunned silence, the weight of the video sinking in. They had always seen influence as something secondary, something that couldn't hold a candle to raw power or advanced technology. But now, they realized how wrong they had been. This human, this ordinary being from an unremarkable planet, had managed to shift the balance of power with nothing more than his voice and his understanding of others. "What you've seen," the instructor added, his voice darkening, "is not an isolated incident. Humans are masters of persuasion. They understand how to make others believe in them, how to inspire action, and how to change the hearts of those who oppose them. And that is perhaps their greatest strength." There was an uncomfortable stillness in the room as the students grappled with the idea. They had been taught that strength and technology were the keys to success. They had been trained to believe that battles were won with firepower, that influence and persuasion were mere tools. secondary to the overwhelming force of their might. But now, they were seeing something entirely different. A Baryxian student, one of the more skeptical members of the group, spoke up. "So, you're saying that a human could convince us to do something against our will?" The instructor's eyes flickered with something between concern and a hint of admiration. "Not just convince," he said slowly, "but influence. Humans don't rely on force or threats, they rely on understanding the psyche of others, on finding a way to make them see the world through their eyes. It's not about domination, it's about making others want to follow." The students exchanged uneasy glances, the full implication of what they were being told dawning on them. Influence wasn't something they could easily control. It was a subtle force, one that worked its way into the minds of others, making them question their own beliefs, their own decisions. And in that moment, the students realized that if humans could use influence in this way, they could change the very structure of power across the galaxy. The instructor didn't give them time to digest the information before he clicked the button again. This time, the footage showed a human standing in the middle of a battlefield, holding a device that emitted a brilliant light. The soldiers, on both sides, alien and human, were at a standstill, their weapons aimed at one another. But the human, standing alone in the middle, raised his hands, signaling for peace. At first, the soldiers didn't move. They were reluctant, unsure if this was some sort of trap. But as the human continued to speak calmly, steadily, the tension in the air began to ease. Slowly, one by one, the soldiers lowered their weapons, their anger and fear dissipating. The instructor turned to face the students, his expression serious. In a galaxy defined by conflict, where might makes right and strength is worshipped, humans are a dangerous anomaly. They don't need to defeat you with weapons. They need only to make you question whether you're willing to fight in the first place. The room fell silent. It was a truth that was both simple and terrifying. Humans didn't need to fight the way other species did. They didn't need to break you, they only needed to make you believe you had already lost. The quiet murmur of the students' thoughts was palpable as the instructor's words faded into silence. They were no longer just absorbing information, they were wrestling with it, trying to fit it into the framework of their understanding of the universe, the power of influence, the untapped potential of a species so seemingly insignificant. The humans, once dismissed as weak and primitive, were now proving to be far more formidable than any of them had expected. The room buzzed with questions, but there was something deeper that weighed on everyone's mind. What if we were wrong? As if sensing the shift in the air, the instructor stood up straighter, his glowing eyes scanning the room. He could feel the curiosity and the fear beginning to grow among the students. They had started to grasp the enormity of what he was saying, but there was still more to understand. Humans weren't just dangerous because of their ability to survive, adapt, or persuade. No, there was something even darker they hadn't yet touched on. "If you think influence was the only weapon humans wield," the instructor said, his voice calm yet ominous, "then you've missed the most terrifying part of them." The students leaned forward, instinctively drawn in by his words. Their minds, already challenged by everything they had learned, hung on his next statement. What could possibly be more terrifying than everything they had already seen? The instructor clicked a button, and the screen flashed to life once more. But this time, the footage was unlike anything the students had seen before. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't even a situation where a human had to fight for survival. This time, it was a close-up of a human's face, but hardened by experience, his expression one of quiet resolve. He was standing in the middle of what appeared to be a destroyed city. Buildings had collapsed around him, smoke and dust hung in the air. Yet, despite the devastation, the human was not running. He wasn't panicking. He was walking through the ruins, his eyes scanning the horizon. His face was calm, but there was something almost unsettling about the way he moved. The camera zoomed out slowly, showing the full extent of the destruction. It wasn't a battlefield. It wasn't a place where an enemy had attacked. No, this city had been abandoned by its own people, left to decay, to fall apart. The human's steady walk through the ruins made it clear that he wasn't just surviving in this place, he was remaking it. Humans, the instructor continued, his voice low, do not only survive in the face of destruction, they create in it. The screen changed again, this time showing a different human, this one, older, with graying hair, standing over a table covered with maps and blueprints. Around him were several others humans, all wearing the same expression of quiet determination. They were planning, strategizing. In the midst of a ruined world, they weren't mourning their fate. They were building again. "Do you understand now?" the instructor asked, his voice cutting through the growing tension in the room. Humans do not just accept the world as it is. They do not stand idle in the face of failure or destruction. They rebuild, they reinvent, and when they have no way to rebuild, they create new paths forward. The footage continued, now showing the human group as they started to rebuild a broken structure, lifting heavy equipment, working together to create something from nothing. Despite the damage, despite the odds, they were doing it. They were starting over, not just surviving, but overcoming. They were not defined by their past. They were defining their future. The students watched in silence, the images slowly sinking into their minds. The human race wasn't just about brute strength or survival. It was about their capacity to adapt to the worst circumstances and, against all odds, rebuild. This, the instructor said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, is what makes humans so dangerous. The students were silent now, a growing unease washing over them. The more they learned, the more they realized that everything they had thought about humans was built on false assumptions. They had viewed them as weak because they didn't possess the technological prowess of more advanced species, the physical strength of the warlike races, or the intellectual brilliance of the greatest minds in the galaxy. But what they lacked in raw power, humans made up for in something far more unsettling: an innate refusal to be defeated, to remain broken. The instructor's words lingered in the air like a threat. The rest of the galaxy, including all of you, may see destruction as the end, but for humans, it is merely the beginning. When they face loss, they find a way to rise from it. When they face chaos, they bring order. When everything falls apart, they build something stronger. The realization began to settle on the students like a heavy weight. This was no longer just about surviving or winning a battle. This was about the human capacity to turn every defeat into an opportunity for growth. The lesson wasn't just about their ability to overcome the impossible, it was about the human instinct to always move forward, to never give up, even when the rest of the galaxy would have long since given up. The instructor clicked the button again, and the screen changed once more. This time the image was even more startling. A human, his face bruised and scarred, was standing in front of a massive alien force. His weapon was nothing compared to what the alien army wielded, but there was no fear in his eyes. The alien soldiers were advancing, their weapons raised, ready to strike, and yet the human stood his ground. The Barixian student whispered, almost to himself. Why would he stay there? The instructor turned toward him, his eyes locking with the students. Because the human knows that sometimes the only way to win is to stand firm. Even when everything else crumbles, they hold their ground. They're not fighting to win, they're fighting because they refuse to lose. A strange silence filled the room. It was a new kind of fear, one the students had never known before. They had always seen themselves as the unstoppable forces of the galaxy. But now they were beginning to understand that the human race was something entirely different. They weren't just a species to be wiped out or defeated. They were a force of nature, a force that refused to bow down. And in that moment, the students knew the truth. Humans had the one thing that no one else had, the ability to rebuild, to adapt, and to keep moving forward, no matter what. The instructor's final words rang out, heavy with meaning. Remember this: you may defeat a human, you may break their bodies, shatter their cities, and destroy their homes. But you will never break their will. And that, in the end, is what makes them the most dangerous species in the universe. The students sat motionless, lost in thought. The lesson was over, but its weight would linger far longer than any weapon could. The room was silent, so still it almost felt as though time itself had paused. The last words of the instructor lingered in the air, heavy and foreboding. You will never break their will. No one spoke, not even a murmur. The students sat, frozen, as though the weight of those words had suddenly altered everything they had believed about the universe and their place in it. The more they reflected on the images, the footage, and the lessons they had just witnessed, the deeper the understanding sank in. Humans were unlike anything they had encountered before. They were unpredictable, they were relentless, and most terrifying of all, they were unconquerable. The instructor's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. Now you understand. You understand why the humans are not to be underestimated. They are not like any species you have faced before. What will you do with this knowledge? The question hung in the air, unanswered, and the silence in the room stretched, each student lost in their thoughts, trying to grapple with everything they had seen. There was a feeling of discomfort among them. The story of humans had always been one of survival, of overcoming impossible odds, but now it was something far more dangerous. They had seen the raw potential of the human spirit, how, despite having the least resources, the least strength, and often the least to lose, humans could still emerge victorious in ways no one could predict. The instructor paced slowly at the front of the room, allowing the tension to build. He knew what was coming, the inevitable realization. You may have thought that your advanced technology, your intellect, and your military might made you invincible. You may have thought that the humans were nothing but primitive creatures, unworthy of attention. But now you know the truth. The students shifted uneasily, feeling the weight of their own arrogance. They had laughed at the idea of a human standing toe-to-toe with their might, thinking of them as weak, as a species that could never stand up to them. But now, each student in that room had witnessed firsthand how wrong they had been. They had seen the humans' resilience, their adaptability, their ability to not just survive, but thrive in conditions that would crush even the most powerful civilizations. One by one, the students' faces fell. Their proud, once unshakable belief in their superiority was now crumbling before their eyes. They were realizing that in their haste to dismiss the humans, they had ignored something far more dangerous: the strength of their spirit, the ability to rise from the ashes and turn their most crushing defeats into opportunities for growth. The instructor's voice softened, almost contemplative. What you've seen today is not just a lesson about humanity, it's a lesson about you. He paused, letting the words settle. You thought you were the strongest species in the galaxy, didn't you? But strength is not just about power. It's not just about weapons, technology, or the ability to destroy. True strength lies in something deeper. It lies in resilience. In the will to keep moving forward when everything around you tells you to stop. The room was now filled with a palpable sense of realization. It was one thing to learn about human determination and adaptability in theory. It was another thing entirely to realize that, despite all their advantages, they were vulnerable to the very thing that made humans so dangerous: their refusal to give up, no matter the odds. As the instructor continued, his voice tinged with something like respect, the students began to understand. Humans will always fight, they will always adapt, they will always find a way to survive. And when they do, they will make sure the world around them changes in the process. Can you say the same about your own species? The question hit like a thunderclap, shattering any illusions of invincibility that had lingered in the students' minds. They had prided themselves on their strength, their intelligence, and their superiority. They had believed they were untouchable, that no one in the galaxy could stand against them. But in that moment, they knew they were wrong. They had underestimated the human spirit, and in doing so they had made a grave mistake. The instructor finally stopped pacing and turned to face the students. Now, he said, his voice steady, the real question is this: what happens when we meet a species like this in the future? What if they are not just survivors but conquerors of adversity? What if they choose to challenge us not with weapons or technology, but with their sheer determination, their will to succeed against all odds? The question hung in the air, unanswered, but it was clear that the students were beginning to see the bigger picture. The human race, once thought of as insignificant, was slowly becoming something else in their eyes, a threat to their way of life, a challenge to everything they had built. The screen flickered again, and a new image appeared. This time, it was of a human standing at the helm of a massive fleet, their eyes focused, their expression determined. The fleet wasn't large compared to others they had seen, but it was growing. The humans, they realized, weren't just surviving, they were building. They weren't just adapting, they were innovating. They weren't just living, they were preparing to take on the universe. The instructor didn't need to say anything more. The students had seen enough. Some of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others clenched their fists. The realization was settling in. The galaxy was a much more complicated place than they had thought. The humans weren't just a species to be ignored, to be left behind in the wake of the more powerful civilizations. They were rising, quietly but surely, building something far stronger than the students had imagined. What will happen, the instructor asked again, his voice now heavy with meaning, when they decide they no longer want to be overlooked? What happens when the humans set their sights on something bigger, when they realize their true potential? The room was silent, and no one had an answer. The uncertainty was growing. The lesson, far from over, had only just begun. The human race, once underestimated, was now a force to be reckoned with, and the universe was about to learn that no species, no matter how powerful, could stand against the unstoppable force of a determined human will.